Victor Blackwell opened his eyes to the sterile white ceiling of his hospital room. The dull ache in his chest was a constant reminder of the 7-hour surgery he'd undergone 3 days ago. At 48, discovering you had a congenital heart defect wasn't exactly on his bucket list. Neither was hearing your wife plotting your murder. As a former Marine turned security consultant, Victor had spent 22 years analyzing risks and neutralizing threats. His company, Sentinel Solutions, provided elite security services to high-net-worth individuals across the country. The irony wasn't lost on him that the greatest threat to his life was sleeping beside him every night. "Mr. Blackwell, how are we feeling today?" Dr. Reynolds entered with his typical brisk efficiency, checking the monitors beside Victor's bed. "Like someone cracked my chest open and played Operation." Victor's voice was hoarse, but his mind was sharp. Too sharp. "Well, that's not far from what happened." Dr. Reynolds chuckled, reviewing the chart. "The good news is we've repaired the defect in your mitral valve. The bad news is your recovery will be extensive. We're talking months of limited activity, careful monitoring, and a strict medication regimen." Victor nodded, his thoughts elsewhere. Yesterday, while drifting in and out of consciousness, he'd overheard his wife, Melanie, speaking in hushed tones just outside his door. "The doctor said recovery takes months. We have to wait," she had whispered urgently. "We can't risk it now, not when everyone's watching him so closely." At first, his drugged mind hadn't processed the implications. But when a male voice had responded, one that definitely wasn't a doctor's, reality began to sink in. "I can't keep waiting, Mel. Every month you stay with him is another month of my life wasted. It won't be much longer. Just be patient. We've waited 5 years. We can wait a few more months." 5 years. The words had cut deeper than the surgeon's scalpel. Victor and Melanie had been married for 12. "Your wife's been quite devoted," Dr. Reynolds commented, interrupting Victor's dark thoughts. "Barely left your side these past few days." "Has she?" Victor's voice remained neutral, a skill honed through years of negotiating with warlords and cartel leaders. "I've prescribed pain medication and several other drugs to prevent complications," Dr. Reynolds continued. "I've gone over everything with Melanie. She insisted on managing your medication schedule herself." "I'm sure she did," Victor murmured. After the doctor left, Melanie arrived carrying a small cooler bag. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her makeup perfectly applied despite the supposed stress of her husband's condition. At 41, she still turned heads, something Victor had once been proud of. "I brought your favorite," she announced, producing a container of homemade chicken soup. "You need to keep your strength up." Victor watched as she fussed over him, arranging a napkin, preparing a spoonful. They'd met when he was hired to upgrade security for the art gallery where she worked. He'd been captivated by her knowledge of Renaissance art and her seemingly genuine warmth. Now, he wondered if anything about their relationship had been real. He accepted the spoonful of soup, letting it sit on his tongue. There was something off about the taste, a slight bitterness beneath the salt and herbs. He'd spent enough time in hostile territory to recognize when something wasn't right. "Delicious," he lied, taking another spoonful before pretending to struggle with staying awake. "Sorry, these meds, making me drowsy." "Don't fight it, honey," Melanie said, stroking his forehead with a tenderness that now seemed calculated. "Rest is the best medicine." Victor closed his eyes, controlling his breathing to mimic sleep. He felt her hesitate beside him, then heard her quietly packing up the soup. Once the door closed behind her, he opened his eyes, reached for the tissue box, and spit the remaining soup into several tissues, sealing them in the plastic bag that had held his personal items. His phone lay charging on the bedside table. With careful movements that wouldn't disturb his monitors, he sent a text to the one person he trusted implicitly. "Need your help. No questions. Room 417. Memorial Hospital. Now." 30 minutes later, Darnell Washington slipped into the room. At 6'4" with shoulders like a linebacker, Darnell somehow still moved with the stealth of a cat burglar, a skill that had made him invaluable during their time together in special operations. "You look like hell, boss," Darnell said, closing the doors silently behind him. "Feel worse," Victor replied. "I need you to get something tested." He held up the sealed bag with the soup-soaked tissues. "And I need you to be discreet." Darnell raised an eyebrow but took the bag without question. "That's not hospital food." "My wife's chicken soup," Victor said flatly. "I think she's trying to kill me." Instead of looking shocked, Darnell simply nodded. In their line of work, betrayal wasn't uncommon. What else do you need? Eyes on my house. Audio if possible. I want to know who's coming and going, especially when she thinks I'm safely tucked away here. Consider it done. Darnell pocketed the bag. Anything else? Victor's eyes hardened. Yeah, don't let me die before I handle this myself. After Darnell left, Victor lay back, his mind calculating possibilities and contingencies. In Afghanistan, Iraq, and a dozen other hellholes, he'd survive by staying one step ahead of his enemies. He never thought he'd need those skills in his own home. 2 days later, Victor was discharged with strict instructions for home care. Melanie played the part of the devoted wife perfectly, listening attentively to the doctor's instructions, collecting his prescriptions, and helping him into their SUV with gentle care. Their home in the suburbs of Minneapolis was a sprawling ranch-style house with a finished basement that Victor had converted into a home gym and office. As Melanie helped him settle into their bedroom, he noted how she arranged his medication on the nightstand, explaining each one in detail. The white ones are for pain, blue for inflammation, and these little yellow ones prevent blood clots, she said, pouring him a glass of water. You need to take them exactly as prescribed. What would I do without you? Victor asked, watching her face for any sign of guilt. Let's hope you never have to find out, she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, Victor pretended to take his evening dose, palming the pills instead and later flushing them down the toilet when he insisted on using the bathroom alone. He kept the crucial heart medications, but disposed of anything she could use to mask poison. When Melanie brought him tea before bed, he pretended to drink it while actually letting it seep into the extra towel he'd positioned beside him. After she thought he was asleep, he heard her on the phone in the hallway bathroom, water running to mask her voice. He's home. No, you can't come over yet. The pills will take time to work. We have to be patient. Victor closed his eyes, a cold fury settling in his chest where pain had been. Patience was something he had in abundance. And while his wife plotted his death, he would be planning something far worse for her: justice. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Basement. The first week of Victor's recovery passed with excruciating slowness. Each day, Melanie played the role of devoted caretaker with Oscar-worthy dedication, adjusting his pillows, preparing special nutrient-rich meals, and administering medications that mysteriously found their way into potted plants and hidden pockets when she wasn't looking. By the 7th night, Victor had gathered enough strength to execute the next phase of his plan. He'd carefully timed Melanie's routine, how she checked on him at 11 p.m. before taking a sleeping pill and retiring to the guest bedroom to let him rest undisturbed. At 1:17 a.m., his phone vibrated silently under his pillow. A text from Darnell, basement. Now, they're both there. Victor eased himself out of bed, ignoring the protest from his healing chest. He moved through the darkened house with practiced silence, avoiding the creaky floorboard near the kitchen and the squeaky hinge on the hallway closet. The basement door was slightly ajar, something Melanie would never have overlooked if she weren't distracted. Voices drifted up from below, too faint to distinguish words. Victor positioned himself at the top of the stairs, careful to remain in shadow. From this vantage point, he could see most of the basement without being seen. Melanie stood before his collection of vintage military memorabilia, wrapping items in bubble wrap, while a man Victor recognized all too well packed them into boxes. Barry Palmer, his wife's art gallery co-owner and, apparently, her lover. Barry was everything Victor wasn't: soft-spoken, artistic, and 15 years younger. We shouldn't be doing this now, Melanie said, carefully wrapping a rare World War II field compass. It's too risky. What if he wakes up? He's drugged to the gills, Mel, Barry replied, sealing a box with packing tape. Besides, we need to gradually move the valuable stuff out before, Before he's dead, you mean? Melanie's voice was cool, practical. You can say it. That's the plan, after all. Victor's hand tightened on the banister. Cold calculation had replaced any remaining doubt or sentiment. The toxicology report came back, Barry said, moving to another shelf. Your friend at the lab said the compound is virtually undetectable after 72 hours. We just need to gradually increase the dosage in his food. And the life insurance policy is ironclad, Melanie added. $5 million with the double indemnity clause for accidental death. Once the pills work, we'll be free and wealthy. What about his company? Barry asked. I'm his sole beneficiary. After a respectful mourning period, I'll sell Sentinel Solutions to that international firm that's been courting him for years. Another 8 figures, at least. Victor had heard enough. He retreated silently to his bedroom, his mind processing this new information with clinical detachment. They weren't just killing him for love, they were killing him for money. By morning, he had formulated the foundation of his counterattack. When Melanie brought his breakfast, oatmeal that he suspected contained more than cinnamon and brown sugar, he greeted her with a warm smile. I'm feeling stronger today, he announced, sitting up with exaggerated effort. I think I'll try walking around the yard later. Concern flashed across Melanie's face. The doctor said to take it easy for at least 2 more weeks. Just to the garden and back, he assured her. Fresh air will do me good. After she left, he contacted his attorney under the guise of updating his will. Instead, he made arrangements far more complex and devastating than a simple change of beneficiary. Later that afternoon, while Melanie was supposedly running errands, but actually meeting Barry at a motel, according to Darnell's surveillance, Officer Neil Dominguez of the Minneapolis Police Department paid Victor an unofficial visit. Neil and Victor went back 15 years, to when Victor's security firm had provided pro bono threat assessment for the police department after a series of officer-targeted attacks. This is some serious shit, Vic, Neil said, reviewing the evidence Victor had gathered, including lab results confirming traces of a rare, plant-based toxin in the soup sample. We could bring her in now on attempted murder charges. Not yet, Victor replied, his voice steady. I want them both. And I want it airtight. Neil ran a hand over his salt and pepper hair. This isn't some third-world country where you can just disappear people who cross you. I'm not planning to disappear anyone, Victor said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm planning to destroy them. Legally. Mostly. I don't like that mostly, Vic. You don't have to like it. You just have to be ready when I give the signal. Victor handed Neil a burner phone. When I text checkmate to this number, bring a team to my house. The basement. What will we find there? Victor's expression darkened. Evidence. Lots of it. After Neil left, Victor called Darnell again. I need you to gather the old team. We have a special operation to plan. While his wife and her lover plotted his death, Victor Blackwell began orchestrating their destruction. Each medication he pretended to take, each poison-laced meal he secretly disposed of, bought him more time to tighten the noose around their necks. They thought they were dealing with a weakened man counting down his final days. They had no idea they were facing a predator who had survived in environments far more hostile than a suburban marriage. And predators, when cornered, don't just fight back, they hunt. Chapter 3, The Spider's Web. 2 weeks into his recovery, Victor implemented the next phase of his plan. Despite Melanie's protests, he insisted on resuming some light work from home. Sentinel can't run itself, he told her over breakfast, having discreetly emptied her latest poison smoothie into a hidden container for evidence. I'm setting up in the study today. Just conference calls and emails, nothing strenuous. Melanie's smile tightened. Are you sure that's wise? Dr. Reynolds was very clear about limiting stress. What's stressful is watching my company flounder without leadership, Victor replied, noting how her fingers twitched slightly, a tell he'd identified years ago when she was anxious. Besides, keeping my mind active will help recovery. Once established in his study, Victor activated the secure laptop Darnell had delivered, one Melanie couldn't access or monitor. His first order of business was reviewing the comprehensive background investigation he'd commissioned on Barry Palmer. The file revealed vulnerabilities Victor could exploit. Barry wasn't just an art dealer with a passion for other men's wives. He was a man with a past he desperately wanted to keep buried. Before reinventing himself as a refined gallery owner, Barry had been Barrett Palmieri, a small-time con artist with a specialty in art forgery. He'd served 3 years for duping wealthy collectors with counterfeit impressionist paintings. After release, he'd changed his name and moved to Minneapolis, where he'd eventually partnered with Melanie to open Palmer Blackwell Fine Arts. Victor wondered if his wife knew she was sleeping with a felon. Based on their basement conversation about gradually selling off his valuable collectibles, they seemed to share a penchant for theft. Perhaps that's what had drawn them together, a mutual appreciation for taking what wasn't theirs. His next call was to Benjamin Frost, Sentinel's chief financial officer, and another former military operative who transitioned to the private sector under Victor's mentorship. I need you to freeze Melanie's access to all company accounts and credit cards, Victor instructed. Backdated paperwork showing financial irregularities. Make it look like she's been embezzling for months. She hasn't been, has she? Ben asked, concern evident in his voice. No, but she's planning something worse, Victor replied. I'll explain everything later. For now, I need her financially destabilized without realizing I'm behind it. Consider it done. Anything else? Yes. Transfer all my personal assets to the contingency accounts. Leave just enough in our joint accounts to avoid suspicion. By evening, Victor had laid the groundwork for financial estrangement, the first strand in his web. When Melanie checked their accounts, she'd find she still had access, but with significantly reduced funds, creating pressure without revealing his hand. That night, he feigned a severe reaction to his medication, allowing Melanie to believe her poisoning efforts were finally showing results. I don't feel right, he gasped, clutching his chest and staggering to the bathroom, where he made retching sounds while actually taking activated charcoal capsules Darnell had provided as a precaution against any poison he might have accidentally ingested. Melanie hovered outside the door, her concerns seemingly genuine. Should I call an ambulance? No, Victor called weakly. Just need to rest. Probably just pushed too hard today. Through the crack in the door, he saw relief wash over her face, quickly masked by wifely concern. Let me help you to bed. She supported him down the hallway, her arm around his waist. Once, he would have found comfort in her touch. Now, it took all his self-control not to recoil. I'll sleep in the bedroom tonight, she said, helping him under the covers. In case you need anything. Victor nodded, playing into her expectations. Having her believe her plan was working would make her careless, and carelessness created opportunities. After she fell asleep, Victor executed the night's critical task. Moving silently to her purse, he extracted her phone and used the fingerprint scanner while she slept, pressing her thumb gently against the sensor. Once unlocked, he installed the spyware Darnell had provided, giving him access to all her communications. The next morning, he appeared weak and disoriented, exactly what a man being slowly poisoned should look like. Melanie brought him tea with toast, her expression solicitous. Maybe we should call Dr. Reynolds, she suggested. You don't look well. Just need to rest, Victor mumbled, watching her through half-closed eyes. No doctors. After she left for the gallery, Victor reviewed the data already streaming from her compromised phone. Text messages to Barry confirmed their acceleration of the poisoning schedule. He looked terrible this morning. I think it's finally working. Another week, maybe two. Don't get sloppy now. Stick to the plan. Untraceable. Natural causes. Heart complications from surgery. I know. I'm being careful, but I can't wait to be free of him. To be with you openly. Soon, babe. Very soon. Have you moved more of the collectibles? 3 more boxes yesterday. He doesn't even notice they're gone. Victor smiled grimly. He had noticed, not just the missing items, but also the replacement of several rare pieces with convincing fakes. Barry's forgery skills were being put to use, it seemed. Later that afternoon, Victor received a call from Neil Dominguez. We've got a situation, Neil said without preamble. Your wife just filed a police report claiming credit card fraud. Says thousands are missing from your accounts. Victor had anticipated this. Let me guess. She's pointing fingers at my company's financial officer? Got it in one. Says he's always been jealous of your success. She's playing the concerned wife angle hard. Worried the stress could worsen your condition. What a loving spouse, Victor replied dryly. Let the investigation proceed normally. She won't find what she's looking for. This is getting complicated, Vic. No, it's getting clearer by the minute. Victor paused. How's our other arrangement coming along? All set. When you give the word, we'll be there. That evening, Melanie returned home in a state of controlled agitation, angry about the financial fraud, but trying not to upset her ailing husband. Don't worry about the money, she soothed, serving him another poisoned meal. I'm handling everything. You just focus on getting better. What would I do without you? Victor asked for the second time since his surgery, watching recognition flicker in her eyes. Let's hope you never have to find out, she repeated, their exchange like lines in a macabre play where only one actor knew the true ending. After dinner, Victor made a show of becoming increasingly unwell, finally collapsing on the sofa with labored breathing. Panicked, Melanie called Barry instead of 911, exactly as Victor had predicted. "He's getting worse fast," she hissed into the phone. "What if he dies now? We're not ready." Victor couldn't hear Barry's response, but Melanie's next words chilled even his hardened heart. "No, I can't just let him die yet. The police would investigate a sudden death. We need it to look gradual. I'll give him the charcoal tablets to slow the absorption, just enough to keep him alive until everything's in place." The irony almost made Victor laugh. The activated charcoal he'd been secretly taking was now being administered by his would-be murderer to delay his death until it was more convenient. When she returned with water and the tablets, he swallowed them obediently, knowing they would help rather than harm him. Within an hour, he made a show of improving slightly, enough to convince Melanie her intervention had worked. As she helped him to bed, Victor caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. Gaunt, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, partly theatrical enhancement, partly the genuine stress of his surgery and ongoing counter-operation. He looked like a man at death's door. Perfect. While Melanie believed she was orchestrating his demise, Victor was assembling the pieces of her destruction. The spider's web was nearly complete. Soon, it would be time to draw in the prey. Chapter 4. The Devil You Know. 3 weeks after his surgery, Victor had accumulated enough evidence to destroy Melanie and Barry 10 times over. His hidden cameras had captured them in compromising positions throughout the house, including detailed discussions of their murder plot. The toxicology reports confirmed escalating levels of thallium, a tasteless, odorless poison once called the poisoner's poison due to its difficulty to detect, in samples of food Melanie had prepared. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Victor wanted more than their imprisonment. He wanted their complete annihilation. For that, he needed to understand what had transformed his wife of 12 years into a calculating killer. The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing Melanie's phone records, Victor discovered frequent calls to a number in Phoenix. Further investigation revealed it belonged to Charlotte Mackenzie, Melanie's estranged sister whom she had claimed was dead. Victor arranged a discreet meeting with Charlotte when she unexpectedly flew to Minneapolis. They met at a quiet cafe 2 towns over, where Victor's security team could ensure their privacy. Charlotte looked like an older, harder version of Melanie, the same blonde hair and delicate features, but with lines of bitterness etched around her mouth. "I was surprised to get your call," Charlotte said, stirring her coffee nervously. "Melanie told everyone I died in a car accident 5 years ago. Apparently, she has a habit of orchestrating deaths," Victor replied dryly. Charlotte's laugh held no humor. "You have no idea what my sister is capable of. Enlighten me." Over the next hour, Charlotte revealed the dark history Melanie had concealed. The sisters had grown up in a wealthy family in Arizona, but their seemingly perfect childhood concealed disturbing truths. Melanie, the favored child, had developed a pattern of eliminating obstacles to her happiness. When she was 16, our parents decided to send her to boarding school after catching her with our neighbor's college-age son, Charlotte explained. 2 days later, they died in a house fire. Gas leak, officially. "You suspect differently?" Charlotte's eyes met his. "I know differently. I saw her tampering with the gas line. When I confronted her, she threatened me. Said accidents happen to people who don't mind their business. Why didn't you go to the police?" "I was 14, terrified, and she was all the family I had left. Plus, I had no proof." Charlotte's hands trembled slightly. "After that, we moved in with our grandmother, who left everything to Melanie in her will. Guess who died next? Heart attack at 72. Not suspicious on its own, but Gamma had just updated her will to split everything between us after catching Melanie stealing from her." Victor listened, pieces falling into place. "And your death?" "I threatened to expose her after finding evidence she'd poisoned her first husband." Charlotte's voice dropped. "The next day, my brake lines were cut. I survived the crash but decided to stay dead. Safer that way. Why contact her now? She found me 6 months ago, said she'd changed, wanted to reconnect." Charlotte's laugh was hollow. "I should have known better. She needed something. My signature to sell our grandparents' estate in Arizona. Worth millions now with development in the area. Let me guess, she's planning to use that money once I'm gone." Charlotte nodded. She mentioned starting fresh with her new love. Said they'd need capital for their gallery expansion. This new information crystallized Victor's strategy. It wasn't enough to catch Melanie and Barry in their current crime. He needed to expose her lifelong pattern. After parting ways with Charlotte, who agreed to testify when the time came, Victor contacted Benjamin Frost again. I need a deeper background investigation, he instructed. Melanie's first husband, her grandmother, her parents, all suspected natural or accidental deaths. Find me connections, evidence, anything that shows a pattern. That evening, when Melanie served his dinner, soup again, likely laced with an increased dose of poison, Victor initiated the next phase of his plan. I'm updating my will tomorrow, he mentioned casually, pretending to eat while actually depositing most of the soup into a hidden container beneath his napkin. Melanie's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Oh, any particular reason? Nearly dying puts things in perspective, Victor replied. I want to make sure everything's in order for you. No complications. That's thoughtful. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Also, I'm transferring most of our assets into a living trust. Immediate access upon my death, no probate court delays. The naked greed that flashed across her face was almost comical. You don't need to worry about such things now. Focus on recovery. Actually, I've been thinking about taking a trip once I'm stronger. Maybe to Phoenix? You mentioned wanting to visit your sister's grave someday. The color drained from Melanie's face. Why Phoenix specifically? Change of scenery. Desert air might be good for my recovery. Victor watched her carefully. Unless there's a reason you'd rather not go there? No, of course not. She recovered quickly. I just think it's too soon for travel. After dinner, Victor pretended to take his evening medication and retire early. Instead, he accessed Melanie's frantic texts to Barry. He mentioned Phoenix. He knows something. Calm down. How could he possibly know about Charlotte? I don't know, but he specifically mentioned her grave. Move up the timeline. We can't risk him digging into your past. Victor smiled grimly. The trap was almost ready to spring. The next morning, he called his attorney from his study, loud enough for Melanie to overhear parts of the conversation. Yes, transfer everything to the trust. Melanie is sole beneficiary. Immediate disbursement upon death. Yes, I understand the implications. When he emerged, Melanie was waiting, concern painted across her features. How are you feeling today? Better, actually. Strong enough to make some decisions. Victor sat across from her at the kitchen table. I've been thinking about the future, Mel. About what happens if I don't recover fully. Her expression softened with practiced sympathy. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. Maybe, but I want to be prepared either way. He reached for her hand, noting how she controlled her instinct to pull away. Which is why I've put everything in your name. The house, the accounts, my company shares, everything. Melanie's eyes widened. Victor, that's what you deserve, he finished for her. After all your devoted care. That night, Victor watched through hidden cameras as Melanie met Barry in the basement again. They were growing bolder, more careless. It's all falling into place, she told him, excitement making her voice higher than usual. He's transferred everything to me. Once he's gone, we'll have it all. Barry pulled her into his arms. How much longer? Days, not weeks. I've tripled the dosage. If that doesn't work. Melanie withdrew a syringe from her purse. This will look like a heart attack, a known complication from his surgery. And you're sure there's nothing that can trace back to us? Positive. I've been careful. Victor doesn't suspect a thing. Victor took out his phone and texted Neil Dominguez. 2 days. Be ready. Then he texted Darnell. Find Charlotte. Keep her safe until this is over. The following day, Victor made a show of becoming dramatically weaker. When Melanie helped him to the sofa, he accidentally dropped a photo from his pocket, one showing Charlotte very much alive at a cafe. What's this? Melanie asked, her voice tight as she picked up the photograph. Oh, just someone who reminds me of you. Victor replied innocently. Found it in an old jacket. He watched terror and calculation war on her face. When she excused herself to make a phone call, his surveillance system captured her panicked conversation with Barry. He has a picture of Charlotte. She's alive and he's in contact with her. That's impossible. You said she died in that crash. I thought she did. We have to move now. Tonight. Don't be stupid. We need to stick to the plan. There is no more plan. If he knows about Charlotte, he might know everything else. Victor smiled to himself. The spider had felt the web tremble. Now it was time to draw in the prey. Chapter 5. Calculated Risk. Victor spent the day setting his final trap. First, he arranged for Charlotte to be safely hidden at a Sentinel Solutions safe house, with Darnell personally handling her security. Next, he contacted Neil Dominguez to finalize the police response. Tomorrow night, Victor confirmed. Have officers in position by 11 p.m., but no one moves until my signal. And if something goes wrong? Neil asked. Then arrest me for whatever's left of them, Victor replied coldly. By evening, the stage was set. Victor took a calculated risk and actually consumed a small portion of his poisoned dinner, enough to exhibit genuine symptoms without risking permanent damage. The activated charcoal and other counteragents he'd been secretly taking would help mitigate the effects, and he needed his deterioration to appear convincing. Within an hour, he was sweating profusely, his heart racing. Perfect symptoms of thallium poisoning. Melanie hovered nearby, her concern appearing genuine to anyone who didn't know better. Maybe we should call an ambulance, she suggested, playing her role. No, Victor gasped. Just need my medication. The emergency one, in my study. Top drawer. When Melanie left to retrieve the non-existent medication, Victor quickly sent a text to Barry from a clone of Melanie's phone that Darnell had prepared. He's crashing. Come now. Bring the supplies. We finish this tonight. 20 minutes later, Barry arrived, carrying a medical bag that undoubtedly contained nothing medicinal. Victor, positioned on the sofa where hidden cameras could capture everything, pretended to be drifting in and out of consciousness. He looks like shit, Barry observed, checking Victor's pulse. How much did you give him? Enough, Melanie replied. But he's stronger than I expected. We need to accelerate things. Barry opened his bag, removing a syringe. This will look like a heart attack. No trace. You're sure about this? Once it's done. I've never been more sure of anything, Melanie interrupted. 12 years of playing the devoted wife to a man obsessed with security and control. Do you know what that's like? To be treated as an accessory rather than a partner. Victor listened, fascinated by her revisionist history of their marriage. In her narrative, he was a controlling monster, she the long-suffering wife. It was almost impressive how thoroughly she justified her betrayal. And you're certain he updated the will? Barry pressed, preparing the syringe. Positive. I called his lawyer myself to confirm, pretending to be concerned about Victor's mental state. Everything transfers to me upon his death. What about the sister? If he's found her. He doesn't know anything concrete, Melanie insisted. And after tonight, it won't matter. We'll be in Arizona by the end of the week, liquidating my family's property. Then Europe, new identities, everything we've planned. As Barry approached with the syringe, Victor knew it was time. He pressed the emergency signal device in his pocket, alerting his security team stationed outside. Then, summoning strength his would-be killers didn't know he possessed, he grabbed Barry's wrist mid-injection. The problem with assumptions, Victor said clearly, all pretense of weakness gone, is how often they're wrong. The shock on their faces was worth every moment of the past month's charade. Before either could react, Victor twisted Barry's arm with practiced efficiency, forcing him to drop the syringe. In the same motion, he drove his fist into Barry's solar plexus, doubling him over. Melanie backed away, her expression transforming from shock to calculation. She reached into her pocket, producing a small revolver, another surprise, but not an insurmountable one. I always had a backup plan, she said, training the gun on Victor. I knew something was off. You've been playing me. Not nearly as long as you've been playing me, Victor replied, slowly standing to his full height. 5 years was it. While I built our life, you plotted my death. You never built a life with me, Melanie hissed. You built a showcase. The perfect house, the perfect wife, the perfect security. I was just another asset to be managed. Victor took a step forward, unconcerned by the weapon. And that justifies murder? It justifies freedom, she countered. Something you never understood. Like Charlotte's freedom? Or your first husband's? Or your parents'? The color drained from Melanie's face. You know nothing about that. I know everything, Mel. About Phoenix, about the convenient deaths, about Charlotte surviving your attempt on her life. Victor took another step closer. The question is, do the police know yet? Barry had recovered enough to join the conversation. Police? What police? On cue, heavy knocking rattled the front door. Minneapolis police. Open up. Panic flashed across Melanie's features. She grabbed Barry's arm. The basement. Now. We can get out through the emergency exit Victor installed. Victor almost laughed. You mean the emergency exit that leads directly to the side yard where 4 officers are currently stationed? That exit. As the police began to force entry, Melanie made a desperate decision. She aimed the gun directly at Victor's chest. If I'm going down, you're coming with me. But before she could pull the trigger, the back door burst open, revealing Officer Neil Dominguez with his weapon drawn. Drop the gun. Now. The next few minutes unfolded in controlled chaos. Melanie, realizing she was trapped, attempted to shift blame, claiming Victor had been abusive, that she'd acted in self-defense. Barry, seeing his dreams of wealth evaporating, quickly turned on her, offering to testify in exchange for leniency. As the police handcuffed them both, Victor withdrew a flash drive from his pocket and handed it to Neil. Everything's here. Recordings of their murder plot, evidence of poisoning, their plans for after my death. And something extra, links to previous suspicious deaths connected to Melanie. Neil pocketed the drive. You never do anything halfway, do you? When someone tries to kill you, halfway doesn't cut it, Victor replied, watching as his wife and her lover were led away. Later that night, after providing his official statement, Victor returned to his empty house. The physical effects of the poison he'd allowed into his system left him drained, but the cold satisfaction of victory sustained him. He poured himself a small measure of bourbon, his first since the surgery, and raised it in a silent toast to his own survival. The game wasn't over yet. Arrests were just the beginning. The complete dismantling of Melanie's life, past, present, and future, would require more work. But Victor Blackwell had always excelled at finishing what he started. Whether in war zones or his own living room, the principle remained the same. When threatened, eliminate the threat. Permanently. Chapter 6. Ghosts of the Past. The weeks following Melanie and Barry's arrests unfolded according to Victor's meticulous plan. While recovering his physical strength, he orchestrated a comprehensive legal and financial assault on the pair that left no avenue of escape. Benjamin Frost had uncovered financial irregularities at Palmer Blackwell Fine Arts. Specifically, Barry had been selling forgeries to unsuspecting clients while Melanie provided authentication paperwork. This information, passed to the proper authorities, added fraud charges to their growing list of legal troubles. Charlotte McKenzie came forward with her bombshell testimony about Melanie's past, prompting Arizona authorities to reopen investigations into the deaths of their parents and grandmother. Exhumations revealed traces of the same poison found in Victor's food. Victor watched the news coverage with clinical detachment. Melanie's arrest photo, smeared makeup, wild eyes, bore little resemblance to the polished woman who had shared his bed for 12 years. The media dubbed her the Black Widow of Minneapolis, a moniker that amused Victor given his surname. For weeks after the arrests, Victor received an unexpected request. Melanie wanted to meet. Against the advice of both his attorney and Neil Dominguez, Victor agreed. Some questions could only be answered face-to-face. The county detention center smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. Victor sat at a metal table, watching through the reinforced glass as guards escorted Melanie into the visiting area. Prison hadn't been kind to her. Her carefully maintained blonde hair had grown out, revealing darker roots, and without makeup, the true hardness of her features showed through. They picked up their respective phones simultaneously. You look better than the last time I saw you, Melanie opened, her voice still carrying that honey-sweet tone she'd perfected over years. Remarkable recovery. Amazing what not being poisoned can do for one's health, Victor replied dryly. A small smile played at her lips. You figured it out that first day in the hospital, didn't you? With the soup. I suspected. Confirmation came later. Always so thorough. She leaned closer to the glass. That's why I chose you, you know. For your attention to detail. The perfect cover for what I needed. And what was that exactly? Legitimacy. Protection. Your security background meant no one would look too closely at me. Melanie's eyes narrowed. It worked for years. Would have kept working if not for that damn defective heart valve of yours. Ironic that my defective heart saved my life, Victor observed. If I hadn't needed surgery, you'd have continued your slow poisoning undetected. We got impatient, she admitted. 5 years is a long time to wait. While we're being honest, tell me, was any of it real? Any moment in 12 years? Something flickered across Melanie's face. Not remorse, exactly, but recognition. The first year, maybe, before I realized what I'd trapped myself in. A comfortable life with a man who gave you everything. A gilded cage, she countered. Everything precisely ordered, secured, controlled. Do you know how suffocating that is? Your security cameras, your background checks on everyone I met, your constant monitoring. Victor allowed himself a small smile. The monitoring you never detected saved my life. The cameras you didn't know about are sending you to prison. Ironic. I underestimated you, Melanie acknowledged without shame. But you underestimated me first. All those years, you thought you knew who you were sleeping beside. A miscalculation I won't repeat, Victor assured her. But you still haven't answered my question. Why kill me? Divorce would have been simpler. Melanie's laugh held no humor. A divorce from Victor Blackwell? The man with connections in every law enforcement agency, with enough money to hire the best attorneys, with a pathological need to win at all costs? You would have destroyed me. Instead, you destroyed yourself. Maybe. Melanie's expression hardened. But I almost had you. Remember that. The great Victor Blackwell, veteran of countless combat zones, nearly taken down by his wife's cooking. Victor leaned forward. Almost doesn't count. And now you'll spend the rest of your life paying for almost. Don't be too sure. Juries can be sympathetic to abused wives. Except you weren't abused, and we both know it. Victor's voice dropped lower. And after Charlotte testifies about your parents, your grandmother, your first husband, well, sympathy will be in short supply. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Melanie's features. She can't prove anything. She doesn't need to. I found your journal, Mel. The one hidden in the false bottom of your grandmother's jewelry box. Detailed plans, dates, methods. Very comprehensive. The color drained from Melanie's face. You're lying. I destroyed that years ago. Victor simply smiled. Whether the journal existed was irrelevant. What mattered was planting the seed of doubt, making her wonder what other evidence might surface. Goodbye, Melanie, he said, preparing to hang up. This is the last time you'll see me. The next time I'm in a courtroom with you, I'll be watching from the gallery as they announce your sentence. Victor, wait. Her composure cracked slightly. There's something you should know. About Barry. About why we. Save it for your cellmate, Victor interrupted, setting down the phone and standing. I stopped caring about your reasons the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. As he walked away, he heard her pounding on the glass, calling his name. He didn't look back. Some ghosts were best left behind, locked away where they couldn't harm anyone else. Outside, Darnell waited beside a black SUV. How'd it go? As expected, Victor replied. She's grasping at straws. Probably going to claim I was abusive to generate sympathy. Will that work? Not once Charlotte testifies. And not with the evidence we've compiled. Victor gazed at the detention center's imposing facade. I want the prosecutor to seek the maximum sentence. No deals. Already arranged, Darnell confirmed. The DA owes you for that security consultation last year. He's personally handling the case. Victor nodded, satisfaction settling like a weight in his chest. And Barry, singing like a canary, offered to testify against Melanie in exchange for reduced charges. Claims she manipulated him, that the murder was her idea. Honor among thieves, Victor remarked dryly. Want me to make sure he gets the same treatment? Darnell asked, his meaning clear. Victor considered it. Barry Palmer deserved every bit of punishment the law could deliver. But there was value in having him turn against Melanie, in letting her experience the same betrayal she'd inflicted. Let him talk, Victor decided. His testimony will help bury her. We can address his reduced sentence later. The implication hung between them. Victor Blackwell had resources and connections that extended far beyond the courtroom. If Barry Palmer thought a plea deal would save him from consequences, he was sorely mistaken. As they drove away, Victor's phone rang. Benjamin Frost's name flashed on the screen. Tell me you have good news, Victor answered. Better than good, Ben replied. We found the money trail. Melanie has offshore accounts linked to her grandmother's estate liquidation. Nearly $7 million tucked away in the Caymans. And Barry, his name's nowhere on the accounts. Looks like your wife was planning her own exit strategy, with or without him. Victor wasn't surprised. Melanie had always played multiple angles. Freeze everything. Then transfer it all to the Victims' Compensation Fund we're establishing. Already done. The press release goes out tomorrow morning. Sentinel Solutions establishes fund for victims of art fraud and their families. We've identified 16 collectors who purchased Palmer's forgeries. Another strand in Victor's web pulled tight. By positioning himself as the benefactor making restitution to victims, he controlled the narrative. Not just the wronged husband, but the honorable businessman cleaning up his wife's mess. Perfect. And the gallery. Being liquidated as we speak. Legitimate works returned to their consignors or sold at auction, proceeds going to the fund. Victor nodded in approval. Keep me updated. After ending the call, he turned to Darnell. Take me to Remington storage. There's something I need to retrieve. An hour later, Victor stood in a climate-controlled storage unit, surrounded by his rarest and most valuable military collectibles, the ones Melanie and Barry thought they had gradually stolen and replaced with forgeries. They never questioned why security at our house was so sophisticated, but the basement had no cameras, Victor mused, running his hand over a preserved Civil War officer's uniform. Amateur mistake. What tipped you off? Darnell asked, helping Victor catalog the items. The weight was wrong on my World War II field compass. The original has a lead component that Barry's replica lacked. Victor's expression hardened. Once I knew to look, the other fakes were obvious. Want us to submit them as evidence? No. Let them believe their forgeries worked. It adds another layer to their fraud charges. Victor carefully closed a display case. Besides, I have other plans for Barry's artistic talents. The next day, as promised, Sentinel Solutions announced its Victims' Compensation Fund. The press coverage was extensive and sympathetic. Victor gave a single statement, portraying himself as a man betrayed but determined to make things right. While I cannot undo the damage my wife and her accomplice have done, I can ensure their victims see justice, not just through criminal prosecution, but through financial restitution. No one should profit from deception and betrayal. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Overnight, Victor Blackwell transformed from wealthy security consultant to crusading public figure. Offers for book deals and television appearances flooded in. He declined them all. His revenge wasn't about publicity, it was about systematic destruction. 3 months after their arrest, as both Melanie and Barry awaited trial, Victor executed another phase of his plan. Using his connections, he arranged for them to be housed in particularly unpleasant sections of their respective detention facilities. Nothing overtly illegal, just small adjustments to their living conditions, cellmate assignments, and privileges that ensured maximum discomfort. For Melanie, this meant sharing a cell with a woman whose husband had died under suspicious circumstances similar to what Melanie had planned for Victor. For Barry, it meant placement near inmates who particularly despised informants and federal witnesses. When Neil Dominguez questioned the ethics of these arrangements, Victor was unapologetic. They planned to murder me slowly and painfully, liquidate everything I built, and disappear with the proceeds, he reminded the officer. They're getting better than they deserve. As autumn turned to winter, Victor's physical recovery progressed while Melanie and Barry's legal situations deteriorated. New evidence continued to emerge. Records of thallium purchases linked to Melanie's gallery account. Testimony from an art appraiser who had questioned some of Palmer Blackwell's authentications. And most damaging, Charlotte's detailed account of Melanie's history of eliminating inconvenient people. By December, both defendants were seeking plea deals. The prosecution, on Victor's instructions, refused all offers. This would play out in open court, under media scrutiny, with every sordid detail exposed. At night, alone in the house they had shared, Victor sometimes wondered if his response had been disproportionate. Then he would remember the taste of poison in his soup, the casual way Melanie had discussed his death, the years of deception. No, he decided each time. This wasn't disproportionate. This was justice. And justice, like revenge, was best served comprehensively. Chapter 7. Trial by Fire. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters on the January morning Melanie's trial began. Victor arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Darnell Washington and Charlotte McKenzie. His appearance had been calculated for maximum impact, the dark suit projecting authority, the lingering gauntness from his poisoning visible enough to remind everyone what had nearly happened to him. Their entrance created a media frenzy. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Victor navigated through the chaos, his face impassive. Beside him, Charlotte trembled slightly, whether from nerves or the cold Minnesota winter, he couldn't tell. "You don't have to do this," he told her quietly as they neared the doors. Your deposition would be enough. Yes, I do, Charlotte replied, her jaw set. 20 years of watching her escape consequences. Not this time. Inside, the courtroom hushed as they entered. Victor nodded to Neil Dominguez, who sat behind the prosecution table, then took his seat in the front row of the gallery. Moments later, Melanie was led in wearing a conservative navy dress, a stark contrast to her usual stylish attire, but clearly chosen to project respectability. Their eyes met briefly. Where Victor had expected to see hatred or fear, he saw only cold calculation. Even now, facing decades in prison, Melanie was strategizing. The trial proceeded with efficiency. The prosecution presented a devastating timeline of events. Melanie's 5-year affair with Barry, the gradual poisoning campaign, the planning for Victor's death, and the intended financial windfall they would have received. Forensic experts testified about the thallium found in preserved food samples, explaining how it caused symptoms easily mistaken for heart complications. Financial analysts detailed how Melanie had positioned herself to control all of Victor's assets upon his death. Throughout, Melanie maintained a facade of wounded innocence. Her attorney, one of Minneapolis's most expensive criminal defense lawyers, painted her as a victim of Barry's manipulation and Victor's controlling behavior. Mrs. Blackwell lived in a surveillance state, her lawyer argued. Every movement monitored, every conversation potentially recorded. If she sought comfort elsewhere, can we truly blame her? And as for these poisoning allegations, we have only Mr. Blackwell's word that he didn't plant this evidence himself. Victor listened impassively. The suggestion that he had fabricated evidence had been anticipated. So had the character assassination. On the third day, the prosecution played the video recordings from Victor's hidden cameras, showing Melanie and Barry explicitly discussing their murder plot. The courtroom fell silent as Melanie's voice filled the room. Once the pills work, we'll be free. $5 million with the double indemnity clause for accidental death. Her attorney objected strenuously, arguing the recordings violated privacy laws, but the judge overruled him. Victor had obtained proper legal authorization for the surveillance after discovering the poisoning attempts. When Charlotte took the stand, the true depth of Melanie's depravity emerged. She testified about their parents' suspicious deaths, the grandmother's convenient heart attack, and her own fatal car accident. I lived in fear for years, Charlotte concluded, tears streaming down her face. Changed my name, moved across the country. All because my sister eliminates anyone who stands between her and what she wants. During cross-examination, Melanie's attorney tried to discredit Charlotte's testimony. Isn't it true that you stand to benefit financially from your sister's conviction? That Mr. Blackwell has provided you with housing, security, and a job at his company? Charlotte's response was measured. The only thing I've ever wanted from Victor was the truth about my sister, and protection from her. By the end of the first week, the prosecution's case appeared unassailable. Then came Victor's testimony, the moment the entire courtroom had been waiting for. As he took the stand, Victor noted how Melanie leaned forward slightly, her expression alert. She was looking for weaknesses, openings she could exploit. She would find none. For 3 hours, Victor detailed his marriage, the surgery, his discovery of the poisoning, and the elaborate counter-operation he'd mounted to gather evidence. He spoke with clinical detachment, as if describing a security operation rather than the betrayal of his wife. Mr. Blackwell, the prosecutor asked, when did you first suspect your wife was trying to kill you? When I overheard her on the phone saying, the doctor said recovery takes months. We have to wait, Victor replied. Given the context and her subsequent behavior, it was clear she was postponing some action until my condition wouldn't raise suspicions. And what confirmed your suspicions? The soup she brought to the hospital. It had an unusual taste, subtle, but distinct. Having worked in regions where poisoning is a common threat, I recognized the signs. When asked about his elaborate counter-surveillance operation, Victor was unapologetic. When someone is trying to kill you, you do what's necessary to survive and ensure justice. During cross-examination, Melanie's attorney attempted to portray Victor as paranoid and controlling. Mr. Blackwell, isn't it true that you installed surveillance throughout your home without your wife's knowledge? That you tracked her movements, monitored her communications, essentially spied on your own spouse? I installed security systems appropriate for a man in my profession, Victor corrected. The additional surveillance was implemented only after I had evidence of the poisoning. Convenient timing, the attorney suggested. And isn't it possible that your military background and security work have made you, shall we say, prone to seeing threats where none exist? Victor's expression remained impassive. I've spent my career identifying genuine threats among many possibilities. That training saved my life. As he stepped down from the witness stand, Victor passed close to the defense table. Melanie whispered something only he could hear. This isn't over. He didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. She was right, it wasn't over. Not yet. The defense case began the following week. Character witnesses testified to Melanie's community involvement and charitable work. Former gallery clients described her as professional and ethical. A psychiatrist suggested she suffered from emotional abuse in her marriage. Then, in a surprise move, Barry Palmer was called to testify, not by the prosecution, but by Melanie's defense. Barry entered looking significantly worse than Melanie. Prison had aged him, and fear had hollowed his cheeks. His testimony began as expected, attempting to shift primary responsibility to Melanie while minimizing his own role. She approached me, he insisted. Said her husband was controlling, abusive, that she needed to escape, but he'd never let her go. The poisoning was her idea. I just went along because I loved her. But as cross-examination progressed, inconsistencies emerged. Barry couldn't explain why. If Victor was so abusive, there were no reports, no witnesses, no evidence beyond his and Melanie's claims. He couldn't justify why murder was preferable to divorce. Most damaging was his admission regarding the stolen collectibles. We replaced them with forgeries I created. Melanie said Victor would never notice, that he bought them as investments, not because he actually cared about their history. By the time Barry left the stand, his credibility was in tatters. The prosecution's redirect had exposed him as an opportunistic liar whose testimony crumbled under scrutiny. The final day of trial brought Melanie herself to the stand, a risk her attorney had counseled against, but one she had insisted upon. Dressed in cream-colored conservative attire, hair pulled back in a simple style, she portrayed herself as a woman caught between two controlling men. I never wanted Victor dead, she claimed, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. Those conversations were fantasies, venting, the kind of dark humor that develops when you feel trapped. Barry manipulated those recordings. Regarding the poison, she offered an alternative explanation. Barry had access to our home. He could have contaminated Victor's food without my knowledge, planning to frame me all along. It was a desperate strategy, pitting the co-defendants against each other. Victor watched from the gallery, noting how skillfully she deployed her tears, how precisely she modulated her voice to project vulnerability. During cross-examination, the prosecutor dismantled her testimony, highlighting contradictions between her claims and the physical evidence. When confronted with the financial records showing she alone controlled the offshore accounts, Melanie faltered. These accounts were established years ago as a personal safety net, she claimed. In my profession, dealing with valuable art, having secure funds is standard practice. And did Barry Palmer know about these accounts? The prosecutor pressed. I may have mentioned them, Melanie admitted. Yet his name doesn't appear anywhere on the documentation. Almost as if you were planning your own exit strategy, with or without Mr. Palmer. Melanie's composure cracked slightly. That's not. And is it also standard practice to transfer funds from your husband's accounts to these offshore holdings? Because our financial experts have traced over $2 million moving from Sentinel Solutions to your personal accounts over the past 3 years. This revelation, which Victor had strategically withheld until this moment, caused a stir in the courtroom. Even Melanie's attorney looked surprised. By the time closing arguments concluded, Melanie's fate seemed sealed. The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts, including attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. As the verdict was read, Victor studied his wife's face. The mask of innocence had finally cracked, revealing the cold fury beneath. When the judge announced she would be sentenced in 30 days pending a pre-sentencing investigation, Melanie turned to look directly at Victor. In that moment, something passed between them, not regret or remorse, but recognition. They had both underestimated each other, but only one of them would pay the price. Outside the courthouse, Reporters clamored for Victor's reaction. He gave a brief, measured statement. Today justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone Melanie Blackwell has harmed throughout her life. I'm grateful to the prosecution team, to the brave witnesses who came forward, and to the jury who saw through the deception. As cameras flashed, a reporter called out, "Will you be at Barry Palmer's trial next month?" Victor's smile was slight but unmistakable. "I wouldn't miss it." That evening, alone in his study, Victor opened a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan he'd been saving for a special occasion. As he sipped the whiskey, watching snow fall outside his window, he reflected on the past 6 months. The betrayal, the poisoning, the elaborate counter-operation, all culminating in today's victory. Yet something felt unfinished. Melanie would serve her time, perhaps decades in prison, but Victor knew her. She would adapt, manipulate the system, perhaps even thrive in her new environment. Her final whispered words, "This isn't over," suggested she still believed she held some power. The trial might be finished, but Victor's revenge was not yet complete. For that, he needed one final act, one that would ensure Melanie Blackwell never again posed a threat to anyone, inside prison or out. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Neil Dominguez's name flashed on the screen. "Congratulations," Neil said when Victor answered. "Justice served." "For now," Victor replied. "But we both know justice and permanence aren't always the same thing." A pause hung between them. "What are you planning, Vic?" "Nothing illegal." Victor swirled his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "Just ensuring loose and stay tied." "Be careful," Neil warned. "You've won. Don't throw that away on." "I never throw anything away," Victor interrupted. "I simply ensure resources are properly allocated." "Speaking of which, how's our friend Barry doing?" "Panicking. His deal's falling apart after his testimony contradicted the evidence. Prosecution's withdrawn their offer." "Shame," Victor said without sympathy. "Almost like actions have consequences." After ending the call, Victor opened his laptop and reviewed the final phase of his plan, the one he hadn't shared with Neil, with Darnell, or with anyone else. Some operations required absolute containment. On the screen, financial records detailed the systematic dismantling of Melanie's hidden resources, not just the offshore accounts discovered during the trial, but others Victor had uncovered through less official channels. Accounts being emptied, assets liquidated, all proceeds directed to various charities and victims' funds. By the time Melanie received her sentence, she would be completely destitute. No resources to hire better attorneys for appeals, no money to bribe guards or buy protection in prison, no nest egg awaiting her if she somehow secured early release. But financial ruin was just the beginning. The second document outlined a more personal destruction, the systematic elimination of every relationship and connection Melanie had cultivated. Former friends, gallery clients. Even her attorneys would receive carefully curated evidence of how she had exploited or deceived them specifically. The third document was the most crucial and the most dangerous if discovered. It detailed how certain information about Melanie's crimes would be distributed to key inmates at the women's correctional facility where she would serve her sentence. Women who had their own reasons to hate those who poisoned husbands or betrayed families. Victor closed the laptop, satisfied. Melanie had tried to orchestrate his death. He would orchestrate her complete isolation. She would live out her days without money, without allies, without hope, surrounded by enemies, her reputation destroyed, her past crimes exposed. Some might call it excessive. Victor called it thorough. He raised his glass to the snowy night outside. "To loose ends," he murmured, "and tying them permanently." Chapter 8. Consequences. Barry Palmer's trial proceeded with considerably less media attention than Melanie's. The art dealer, having failed in his attempt to shift blame entirely to his former lover, faced a hostile prosecutor no longer interested in deals. His own attorney, sensing a losing battle, advised a guilty plea. Barry refused, convinced he could still salvage something from the wreckage of his life. It was a miscalculation that would cost him dearly. Victor attended each day of the proceedings, sitting in the same seat in the gallery, his expression impassive. He'd arranged his schedule to ensure his presence, a silent reminder to Barry of exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. Unlike Melanie's trial, this one featured no dramatic testimony or surprising revelations. Instead, The prosecution presented evidence of Barry's forgeries, his participation in the poisoning plot, and his intended financial gain from Victor's death. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. As Barry was led away, he locked eyes with Victor briefly. The former art dealer's expression held no defiance, only a dawning recognition of the comprehensive nature of his defeat. Victor's slight nod acknowledged this understanding, a wordless communication between predator and prey. That evening, Darnell joined Victor for dinner at an upscale steakhouse where they could speak privately. "Two down," Darnell observed, cutting into a perfectly cooked ribeye. "Feeling vindicated?" "Vindication suggests I needed external validation," Victor replied. "This was simply about consequences." "Speaking of consequences, there's been a development with Melanie." Darnell slid a tablet across the table. "Thought you'd want to see this." The tablet displayed an incident report from the Women's Detention Center. Melanie had been attacked by 3 inmates while returning from the shower facilities. Though she had survived, her injuries were significant: a broken arm, cracked ribs, facial lacerations. "Unfortunate," Victor commented, his tone neutral as he returned the tablet. "Prison can be dangerous." Darnell's expression remained carefully blank. "Especially when someone ensures the most volatile inmates receive detailed information about a new prisoner's crimes." "Is that what happened?" "That's what I'm told." Darnell took a sip of water. The same source mentioned that similar information continues to circulate throughout the facility. "Melanie won't find many allies there." Victor nodded slightly. "The truth has a way of finding its audience." They ate in silence for several minutes before Darnell spoke again. "The team's been asking when you're coming back. Sentinel needs its commander." "Soon," Victor promised. "There are still matters requiring my attention first." Those matters included Victor's appearance at Melanie's sentencing hearing the following week. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial, the media having largely moved on to more current scandals. But Victor's presence ensured some coverage, the wronged husband witnessing justice's final act. When invited to make a victim impact statement, Victor approached the podium with measured steps. He had prepared his words carefully, constructing each sentence for maximum effect. "Your Honor," he began, "I've given considerable thought to what I should say today. Society expects victims to speak of trauma, of healing, of forgiveness. I will do none of those things." The courtroom stilled, attention sharpening. "Instead, I will speak of consequences. For 12 years, I shared my life with a woman who spent at least 5 of those years plotting my death, who poisoned me systematically, who discussed my dying with her lover as casually as others might discuss dinner plans, who would have erased my existence for financial gain." Victor turned slightly, making direct eye contact with Melanie, who sat rigid at the defense table. "I do not seek closure or healing. I seek justice, permanent and irrevocable. Melanie Blackwell has left a trail of suspicious deaths throughout her life. My only good fortune was discovering her intentions before joining that list. Others weren't so lucky." He returned his attention to the judge. "I asked the court to impose the maximum sentence allowable under law, not for my benefit, but for the protection of society. Because a predator like Melanie Blackwell never stops hunting, she simply identifies new prey." As Victor returned to his seat, Melanie's attorney rose to request leniency, citing her community involvement and lack of prior criminal record. The judge listened impassively before delivering his decision. "Melanie Blackwell, you have been convicted of crimes that show a disturbing level of calculation and moral disregard. This court cannot ignore the evidence suggesting a pattern of similar behavior throughout your life, even absent formal convictions." The sentence came down like a hammer: 35 years without possibility of parole. Effectively a life sentence for a woman now in her 40s. As the guards prepared to lead her away, Melanie turned toward Victor. Her expression held something he hadn't seen before, not anger or defiance, but a grudging respect. "You won," she said, loud enough for him to hear. "Completely." Victor didn't respond verbally. Instead, he simply checked his watch, a dismissive gesture indicating that her fate was merely an appointment in his day, now concluded. Outside the courthouse, Charlotte waited beside a black SUV. Since coming forward with her testimony, she had undergone a transformation of her own. No longer living in fear, she had cut her hair short, dyed it dark, and begun building a new life. one that included a position at Sentinel Solutions managing their charitable foundation. "Is it done?" she asked as Victor approached. "It's done," he confirmed. 35 years. Charlotte nodded, relief visible in the loosening of her shoulders. "And Barry? Sentencing next month, but after today's precedent, he's looking at 20 to 25 years. Victor opened the car door for her. "Ready to put this behind you?" "I've been ready for 20 years, Charlotte replied. "Just never thought it would actually happen." As they drove away, Victor's phone chimed with a text from an unlisted number. Neil Dominguez had information he preferred not to share over official channels. Prison transfer processing, and being sent to Bedford Hills maximum security. "Your suggestion?" Victor considered his response carefully. Bedford Hills housed some of the most dangerous female offenders in the system, women serving multiple life sentences with nothing to lose. It would be a harsh environment for a former gallery owner accustomed to luxury. "Perfect. No objection," Victor texted back. Justice takes many forms. Over the following months, Victor gradually returned to his normal routine. Sentinel Solutions had thrived despite his reduced involvement, a testament to the team he'd built. New contracts poured in, many citing Victor's personal experience with security threats as a selling point. What had nearly killed him had ultimately strengthened his business. Physically, he had recovered fully from both the heart surgery and the poisoning. His doctors called it remarkable. Victor called it discipline and determination. He returned to his rigorous workout regimen, building back the strength that had once made him formidable in combat zones worldwide. Emotionally, however, recovery proved more complex. Victor had never been one for introspection, but even he couldn't ignore the fundamental shift in his worldview. Trust, always a limited resource in his profession, had become virtually non-existent in his personal life. Charlotte noticed the change during their weekly dinners, a new tradition they had established after the trials. "You're not sleeping," she observed over dessert one evening. "The same signs I recognize in myself from years of looking over my shoulder." Victor didn't deny it. "Old habits." "It's more than that," Charlotte pressed. "You've won, Victor. Melanie's gone. Barry's gone. They can't hurt you or anyone else." "There are always others," Victor replied. "Different faces, different methods, same intentions." Charlotte studied him with the insight of someone who had experienced similar trauma. The problem with waging war is knowing when it's truly over, when to put down the sword. Later that night, alone in his home office, Victor reflected on her words while reviewing the weekly reports he still received about Melanie and Barry. His sources inside the corrections system provided detailed accounts of their daily lives, their movements, associations, conversations. Knowledge was control, and Victor intended to maintain absolute control over the two people who had tried to destroy him. The reports painted a bleak picture of Melanie's new existence. Isolated from other inmates after multiple attacks, she spent 22 hours daily in protective custody. Her appeals had been denied, her remaining assets seized to pay restitution to victims of her gallery's fraud. Even her attorney had withdrawn from her case, citing irreconcilable differences after Victor anonymously provided evidence that Melanie had been planning to accuse him of ineffective counsel. Barry fared no better. Housed in a medium-security facility, he had quickly discovered that his artistic talents made him valuable to certain inmates who needed documents forged. This arrangement offered some protection but effectively made him a prisoner within the prison, owned by whoever controlled the block. Victor closed the reports, a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. They were suffering, not just the physical discomfort of incarceration, but the psychological torture of having no control, no resources, no hope. Just as they had planned for him. Was it enough? Charlotte's question about knowing when war was truly over lingered in his mind. Victor had spent his entire adult life identifying and neutralizing threats. When did vigilance become obsession? When did justice become vengeance? He had no answer, only the certainty that he would continue monitoring them for as long as necessary. Not out of hatred or even anger. Those emotions had burned away months ago, but out of the same professional thoroughness that had defined his military career and his business. Loose ends remained dangerous until properly secured. Victor Blackwell never left loose ends. The following week brought news that tested this resolve. Neil Dominguez called with information too sensitive for text or email. "There's been an incident at Bedford Hills," Neil said without preamble. Melanie was found unconscious in the shower facility. Multiple stab wounds, made with improvised weapons. Victor's pulse remained steady. Fatal? No. She's in the prison infirmary, stable condition. Neil paused. The thing is, no one's talking. No witnesses, no leads. But word is it was arranged by someone on the outside. Naturally, they'd assume that, Victor replied, his voice neutral. Melanie has made plenty of enemies. Victor, Neil's voice dropped lower. Tell me you didn't orchestrate this. I didn't orchestrate this particular incident, Victor answered truthfully. Creating an environment where such an attack was inevitable wasn't the same as ordering it directly. Though I can't say I'm particularly disturbed by it. Neil's exhale was audible. This needs to stop. You've won. She's serving 35 years. What more do you want? The question echoed Charlotte's concern, forcing Victor to consider his endgame. What did he want? Melanie and Barry imprisoned? Accomplished. Their reputations destroyed? Done. Their suffering? Ongoing. Perhaps the real question was simpler. When would it be enough? I'll consider your perspective, Victor said finally. And I appreciate your concern. After ending the call, Victor sat motionless, contemplating his next move. The systematic destruction of Melanie and Barry had consumed him for nearly a year. It had been necessary, not just for justice, but for his own survival. Predators like Melanie never stopped unless permanently neutralized. But there was truth in both Charlotte's and Neil's warnings. The line between justice and obsession was thinner than he cared to admit. At some point, continuing this crusade would diminish rather than empower him. Victor reached for his phone and composed a message to his prison contacts. No further information required on Blackwell or Palmer. Terminate monitoring. Then he sent a similar instruction to Darnell regarding the financial tracking of Melanie's remaining associates. It wasn't forgiveness. Victor Blackwell did not forgive betrayal. But it was recognition that some battles, once won, didn't require perpetual refighting. Melanie and Barry would serve their sentences in whatever conditions the system provided. Their suffering would continue without his active management. Victor's focus needed to return to the living, to rebuilding rather than destroying. Sentinel Solutions had expanded significantly, with new divisions focused on cybersecurity and executive protection. Charlotte's Victims Foundation was gaining national recognition. These were legacies worth nurturing. The war wasn't over. Victor remained too much of a realist to believe threats would ever completely disappear. But this particular battle had reached its conclusion. The enemy was defeated, the territory secured. It was time to lower the sword, if not sheath it entirely. Chapter 9. Ashes and Phoenix. 1 year to the day after Melanie's sentencing, Victor stood at the edge of his property, watching as workers demolished the house he had shared with her. Each crash of the wrecking ball was cathartic, destroying the physical space where betrayal had flourished. Seems a bit extreme, Neil Dominguez commented, standing beside him. It's a perfectly good house. It was never about the structure, Victor replied. It's about eliminating reminders. The decision to raise the house had come after months of living amid memories he couldn't erase. Every room held echoes of Melanie, her laughter, her lies, the careful way she had measured poison into his food at the kitchen counter. New furniture and fresh paint couldn't exorcise those ghosts. So Victor had opted for complete destruction, followed by new construction on the same lot. A modernist home designed around security, comfort, and most importantly, no associations with the past. What about the basement? Neil asked. Your collection? Relocated to a proper gallery space at Sentinel's new headquarters, Victor explained. Better security, better climate control. What he didn't mention was his donation of several key pieces to museums, items Melanie and Barry had particularly coveted. Their names appeared nowhere in the donation materials. Even this acknowledgement of historical significance had been denied them. As the last wall collapsed, Victor felt something shift within him. Not closure, exactly, but a door closing on a chapter that no longer required his attention. The demolition was symbolic, but symbols held power. New foundations could only be built once the old structure was completely removed. Later that evening, Victor hosted a small gathering at his temporary penthouse apartment. The guests included his core team from Sentinel, Darnell, Benjamin, and other key personnel, along with Charlotte and Neil. These were the people who had stood with him through the darkest period of his life, who had helped him not just survive but emerge stronger. A toast, Victor announced, raising his glass. to endings that enable new beginnings. The group responded with raised glasses and murmurs of agreement. As conversation flowed around him, Victor observed the interactions with new perspective. Charlotte was laughing at something Benjamin said. Her entire demeanor transformed from the frightened woman he'd first met. Darnell was discussing security protocols with Neil, their former military evident in their gestures. These connections, built on trust, loyalty, and shared purpose, were the antithesis of what he'd had with Melanie. They were real, tested by crisis, strengthened through adversity. "You seem contemplative," Charlotte noted, joining him by the windows overlooking the Minneapolis skyline. "Having second thoughts about the house?" "No," Victor replied. "Thinking about reconstruction rather than demolition." Charlotte smiled. "That's progress. For a while, I wondered if you'd ever look forward instead of back." "Professional hazard," Victor admitted. "In security, looking backward identifies threats. Looking forward invites them. And in life?" "In life?" Victor considered her question carefully. "In life, perhaps both perspectives have value." The evening wound down slowly, guests departing until only Charlotte remained. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Not romance, but a connection forged through shared trauma and mutual understanding. She had become a confidant, perhaps the only person who truly understood the shadows Melanie had cast over both their lives. "I received a letter from her," Charlotte said after the others had gone, accepting the coffee Victor offered. "From prison." Victor's expression sharpened. "And full of remorse. Asking forgiveness. Claiming she's found religion." Charlotte's laugh held no humor. "Same manipulation, different packaging." "Did you respond?" "No." Charlotte set down her cup decisively. "Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some people don't deserve second chances." Victor nodded, respecting her decision. "And Barry? Has he tried to contact you?" "His lawyer sent feelers about a potential deal. Testimony about other cases in exchange for protective custody." Charlotte shook her head. "Apparently, prison hasn't been kind to him either." They sat in comfortable silence, the city lights creating patterns across the living room floor. Eventually, Charlotte asked the question Victor had been expecting. "Do you ever regret how far you took it?" The surveillance, the evidence gathering was necessary, but after that, ensuring they had nothing and no one left. Victor considered her question with the same strategic assessment he applied to professional decisions. "Regret suggests I would choose differently if given another opportunity." "I wouldn't." "Why?" "Because predators don't reform," Victor replied, his voice hardening slightly. "They adapt, they hide, they wait for opportunity. The only effective response is complete neutralization." Charlotte studied him for a moment. "You're talking about Melanie, but I think you're also talking about yourself." The observation struck closer to truth than Victor cared to admit. There was a reason he had excelled in combat zones and security operations. The same predatory instinct he recognized in Melanie existed within him, but channeled toward different purposes. "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but I direct my capabilities toward protection rather than destruction." "Usually," Charlotte amended with a knowing look. "Usually," Victor conceded. After Charlotte left, Victor stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below. Minneapolis was entering spring, the last traces of winter receding. Soon, construction would begin on his new home, a structure designed to his exact specifications, incorporating everything he had learned about security, comfort, and defense. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Barry Palmer had been hospitalized after an altercation with another inmate. His condition was listed as serious but stable. Victor closed the notification without emotion. Whatever happened to Barry now was the natural consequence of his own actions and the environment those actions had created for him. The same applied to Melanie. Victor no longer actively orchestrated their suffering, but neither did he intervene to prevent it. They had made their choices. Now they lived with the results. Just as he lived with the knowledge that the wife he had loved had never truly existed. 6 months later, Victor moved into his newly completed home. The modernist structure bore no resemblance to its predecessor. All clean lines, open spaces, and state-of-the-art security that remained invisible to casual observation. It was a fortress disguised as a residence, protecting without advertising its capabilities. Much like its owner, Sentinel Solutions had expanded internationally under Victor's renewed leadership, specializing in protection for high-risk clients in unstable regions. The company's reputation for thoroughness and discretion attracted prominent clients, business leaders, politicians, and occasionally foreign dignitaries who required security beyond what their governments provided. Victor's personal experience with betrayal had become a selling point rather than a liability. Clients trusted someone who had survived an intimate threat, who understood that danger often came from unexpected directions. Charlotte had developed the Sentinel Foundation into a respected nonprofit, providing security consultation and support for victims of domestic violence. Her personal history, now publicly acknowledged, gave the foundation's work authenticity and urgency. On a crisp October morning 2 years after Melanie's conviction, Victor received the news he had anticipated but not actively sought. Neil Dominguez called as Victor was reviewing security protocols for an upcoming client engagement in Eastern Europe. "Thought you should hear this from me," Neil began. "Melanie was found dead in her cell this morning. Apparent suicide, though investigation is ongoing." Victor absorbed the information without visible reaction. Details: bedsheet, makeshift noose. Happened during shift change when monitoring was lightest. Neil paused. No note, but reports indicate she'd become increasingly isolated. No visitors for over a year, mail restricted after harassment complaints from multiple recipients of her letters. The isolation had been by design, Victor's design, implemented before he had stepped back from active management of her destruction. Each person who might have offered Melanie comfort or connection had received carefully curated information about how she had specifically betrayed or endangered them. One by one, they had cut ties, leaving her truly alone. "I see," Victor said finally. "Thank you for the information." "That's it? Thank you for the information?" Neil sounded incredulous. "The woman you were married to for 12 years just died." "The woman I thought I was married to never existed," Victor corrected. "What died was the shell she inhabited. Melanie herself disappeared long ago." After ending the call, Victor stood and walked to the wall of windows overlooking his property. The autumn leaves created a tapestry of red and gold against the evergreens he had planted as a natural security barrier. Beauty and protection, aesthetics and function, balanced as he had finally balanced his life. Did he feel vindication? Satisfaction? Closure? Victor examined his emotional response with clinical detachment and found nothing. No triumph, no regret, no relief. Melanie's death was simply information, the conclusion of a file that had already been archived. That evening, he called Charlotte to relay the news. Her response mirrored his own detachment. "So it's truly over," she said after a moment of silence. "All those years of fear, of looking over my shoulder, of wondering when she'd appear again." "It's over," Victor confirmed, "though Barry remains." A footnote, Charlotte dismissed. He was never the architect, just a willing tool. They spoke briefly about practical matters, whether to make a statement, how to respond if contacted by authorities or media. Both agreed that silence was the appropriate response. Melanie had commanded enough attention in life. She deserved none in death. After ending the call, Victor poured himself a measure of scotch and stepped onto the terrace. The night air carried the scent of coming frost, clean and sharp. He raised his glass to the darkened sky. "To consequences," he said softly. "May they always find their mark." 3 years later, Victor stood at the helm of a vastly expanded Sentinel Solutions. The company had tripled in size, with offices in 6 countries and specialized divisions handling everything from corporate espionage prevention to counterterrorism consulting. His personal wealth had grown proportionally, though money had never been his primary motivation. Security, control, these remained his driving forces. The ability to identify threats and neutralize them before they materialized. To protect what mattered, whether clients, assets, or the small circle of people he now cautiously called friends. On a rare day off, Victor walked the perimeter of his property, inspecting the security measures with practiced eyes. The house stood as a monument to lessons learned. No surveillance blind spots, no vulnerabilities, no unlocked doors, physical or metaphorical. As he completed his circuit, he noticed Charlotte's car approaching the gate. Today marked the 5th anniversary of Melanie's conviction, not a date they formally acknowledged, but one that inevitably carried significance. "Thought you might want company," she said as she joined him on the terrace. Even soldiers shouldn't stand watch alone on days like this. Victor nodded, appreciating her understanding. Charlotte had become the closest thing to family he now allowed himself, a connection based on shared experience rather than blood or romantic attachment. 5 years, he remarked, seems both longer and shorter. Time loses meaning when you've lived in survival mode, Charlotte replied. Everything becomes before and after rather than specific dates. They shared a comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the tree line. Eventually, Charlotte asked the question that had remained unspoken between them. Do you ever think about starting over? Not just new house, new business focus, but a new personal life. Victor considered her question with his usual thoroughness. I haven't ruled it out entirely, but it would require a level of trust I'm not certain I can, or should, redevelop. Understandable, Charlotte nodded. Though I sometimes wonder if that's exactly what Melanie would have wanted. You, permanently isolated because of what she did. The observation struck Victor with unexpected force. Had he, in his determination to prevent further betrayal, allowed Melanie to define his future? Was continued isolation another form of her victory? An interesting perspective, he acknowledged. One I'll need to consider. Later, after Charlotte had gone, Victor reviewed the security footage from his property's perimeter cameras, a nightly ritual that brought both practical benefit and psychological comfort. All was secure, all threats identified and classified as minimal or non-existent. Yet Charlotte's words lingered. The most insidious prison was one you built yourself, with walls of distrust and isolation rather than concrete and steel. Had he escaped Melanie's physical threat only to confine himself within the consequences of her betrayal? Victor Blackwell, who had built his reputation on identifying and neutralizing threats, faced perhaps his greatest challenge, determining whether safety justified solitude, whether survival alone constituted victory. As he completed his security check, Victor made a decision. Control didn't require isolation. Vigilance didn't demand emotional quarantine. He would never again be the man who walked blindly into betrayal, but neither would he remain forever defined by that experience. Adapt and overcome, he murmured to himself, echoing the military mantra that had guided him through combat zones worldwide. Victor closed his security monitors and stepped onto the terrace once more. The night had deepened, stars emerging above his carefully constructed fortress. He had survived, not just physically, but with his core intact. He had neither broken nor bent in the face of ultimate betrayal. That was not just survival. That was victory. In the calculated destruction of those who had tried to destroy him, Victor had proven his fundamental nature. He did not forgive betrayal. He did not forget those who moved against him. When threatened, he responded with overwhelming force and precision. But in rebuilding from the ashes of that betrayal, he demonstrated something equally important: resilience. The capacity to construct something new and stronger from destruction. Victor raised his glass to the night sky, offering a final toast to lessons learned and battles won, to endings that enabled new beginnings, to the phoenix that rises from ashes of its former self, not unchanged, but undefeated. To survival, he said softly, and everything that comes after. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.